Welcome back, true believers and all you merry Marvelites, to another laid-back discussion video that we are going to have today pertaining to the Guardians of the Galaxy game. So with the reveal of this game and all the details surrounding it still relatively fresh in all of our minds, and knowing exactly just how massive of a property this is potentially going to be for the Marvel Games brand, I simply wanted to have a further discussion indicating exactly why this game needs to succeed for Marvel Games as a whole. Or to be more specific, I should say that this is going to pretty much determine the overall fate as to where we can see the Marvel Games and Square Enix partnership down the line. Because if you're someone who has been keeping up with all the massive Marvel Games news, or if you've just seen any of my previous videos, then you would know the overall status as to where exactly previous Marvel games, mainly with Marvel's Spider-Man, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Marvel's Avengers, do land within the public eye. Because when it comes to the AAA takes that we have seen from Insomniac and their handling with Spider-Man, they have 110% surpassed the expectations coming from critics and fans alike, while also being able to fully outsell every other AAA superhero game that has ever released ever since the main launch of Spider-Man PS4, where officially by the end of 2020, it did become the highest selling superhero game of all time with over 20 million units sold. And remember, that game is only exclusive to one platform. And while it may have not as sold as well as Marvel's Spider-Man, Miles Morales is still doing extremely well in terms of consumer and critic reception, and is doing incredible sales numbers every time more people are able to fully purchase the PlayStation 5 console. Because even though Miles Morales is a cross-generation game, it did indicate throughout sales statistics that more people are actually going out of their way to buy the game on next-gen instead of current-gen, in order to play the best experience possible. Which sadly does round up to a polar opposite scenario regarding Marvel's Avengers, where for that case of the game's overall sales records is that it was declared a full financial flop from Square Enix themselves, where they did lose to around $60 to $70 million ever since the game's main launch all the way back in September of 2020. And given the game's live service nature, the overall player count the game has seen in recent months has only been staggeringly decreasing with each passing day. And based on the most recent statistic the game has seen in terms of its player count, it's only reached up to the hundreds, which is crazy given that it's a massive AAA Marvel property. So in short, what does the huge financial success and major critical acclaim from Insomniac's Spider-Man franchise and the massively lackluster results of Marvel's Avengers have anything to do with the Eidos Montreal Guardians of the Galaxy game? Well, for starters, this can pretty much only be seen as bad news when it does come to Square Enix themselves. Because as you should all know by now, it was announced all the way back in 2017 that Marvel Games and Square Enix have indeed come together to form a multi-year, multi-game partnership, creating various AAA Marvel games within their production pipeline. But of course, that was under the assumption they had before Marvel's Avengers released, where they pretty much thought that the game would outsell their wildest expectations and just be perceived generally fine amongst the main community. But given how poor of a state the game remains to be in, and just seeing how much money they completely lost when developing this game, they clearly don't want to have a circumstance like that happen again when it does come to Guardians of the Galaxy. However, given the situation that they currently find themselves in, they might consider it as a bit too little too late. Even though we're well aware as to what exactly Guardians of the Galaxy is, which is shaping up to be a completely different experience to what we saw with Marvel's Avengers, where Guardians of the Galaxy is going to be a fully AAA, single-player, action-adventure, story-driven, third-person game with no DLC or microtransactions of any kind, they still have a lot to live up to when it does come to gaining back the trust of the general consumer, knowing just how poorly Square Enix handled their overall reception with Marvel's Avengers. Even if you are someone who does thoroughly enjoy the game for what it turned out to be, the fact of the matter is that Marvel's Avengers is an extremely controversial title within the superhero gaming genre. And while this may not sound pretty in the slightest, I can guarantee you all right now that there is going to be a certain group of people who are simply not going to play Guardians of the Galaxy in the slightest simply because it was published by Square Enix, which again is a primary result of the general consumer losing complete trust in Square Enix as a company, and they're not willing to give their next massive Marvel project a chance simply because of how poorly they were let down with their previous installment. And even though their cinematic appearances within the MCU are still pretty beloved by a lot of fans around the world, you do have to keep in mind that the Guardians Guardians of the Galaxy as a team are simply not as majorly well known or as popular in comparison to either that of the Avengers or, of course, Spider-Man himself. We have seen the Guardians be featured in various gaming formats previously, like that of the Telltale Guardians of the Galaxy game, which is probably their most well-known one, and of course their featured inclusions within Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 The Black Order and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. But most of the time, the only two major superheroes that are ever seen to receive AAA gaming experiences is, of course, Spider-Man and Batman. And recently, that is changing with the likes of Marvel's Avengers and, of course, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, but seeing the Guardians receive a AAA game of this scale is something that we have never seen before within the gaming industry. Where, in my eyes, I do find that relatively exciting because it does show that Marvel Games is willing to take risks and do something that's hopefully a bit more ambitious than what the standard norm is. Although I do think it's safe to say that if anyone at Eidos, Square, or Marvel ends up botching this Guardians of the Galaxy game in any way, shape, or form by the time it does release in October of this year, then I do think there's a very high chance that Marvel may end up cutting ties with Square completely, and instead try and look for other developers within the gaming industry that are probably willing to make a different type of game than what we have previously seen with Square's outings with Marvel's Avengers. Because even though that game is still planned to quote-unquote include content for years to come, it's simply not getting enough traction that a massive Marvel property like the Avengers should be getting. And if a similar fate like that falls onto the Guardians, then I do think it's safe to call it quits. Even though I personally don't think this game is going to warrant any type of Game of the Year nominations by the time it releases, all it has to do to satisfy fans is simply deliver an encapsulating story with well-rounded characters and, above all, fun gameplay. And knowing that there's no co-op multiplayer, no live service, and no microtransactions already makes me feel a bit more confident as to what exactly the final product is going to be come launch. But again, we're just gonna have to wait and see as to how exactly this game is perceived amongst critics and fans by the time October rolls around. But with all that said, everyone, that's the video I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. How are you personally feeling about the Guardians of the Galaxy game, and what would you personally do if the Marvel and Square Enix partnership were to end if the game doesn't meet up to their expectations? Again, I just don't think that the Guardians have that massive amount of marketing power like a character like Spider-Man or Batman do when it does come to selling their own standalone games. But if the game manages to come out with beyond stellar reviews from both critics and fans alike, then I do think there is a pretty good chance for not only for us to receive even more Marvel and Square Enix games down the line, but also see a potential sequel to see exactly where the Guardians can go next in their own universe. But still, I'll just make sure to keep my fingers crossed to see exactly how the game turns out. And until next time, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Stay merry, Marvelites. Feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy. And without further ado, peace out.